Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Bottom Line, where we bring in top experts to break down the most pressing business and economic stories of the day. My name is Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this exclusive interview. Now, the Polish government has found itself in the bind. The budget deficit is high and will probably reach 5% of GDP this year. At the same time, the public debt is close to the constitutional limit, which stands at 60% of GDP. The question is, what Polish government can do to taking into account all the spending needs? And for that, we turn to Jakub Borowski, chief economist at Credit Agricole Bank of Poland. Hello, sir, and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So first, let's take a look at the Polish public debt, since it's been rising fast and is closing in on the 60% limit. Do you think that Poland will be surpassing it? And if so, how quick do you think it will happen?
First of all, it's still visibly below 60% of GDP. There are two definitions or two approaches to public debt. I think we have to clarify it at the beginning. So there is a kind of domestic definition, which is enshrined in the local law, in the Polish law, and there is this unified, common EU-based, so European Union-based approach that makes those numbers comparable between the countries. And I think we should focus on the second one because it is also important in the context of the so-called excessive deficit procedure. So the measures that the government has to take in order to reduce the deficit, to reduce the debt. So I think we should, once we analyze the fiscal position of the Polish government, the fiscal situation in Poland and in other countries, we usually use those European statistics. And when we talk about those European statistics, the situation is not that bad in a sense that the debt GDP ratio has already crossed 50%. To GDP level, but it's still below 60. According to the government, which recently published this multi-year financial framework, the debt GDP ratio will cross 60% in 2026. However, it has been immediately announced, together with the publication of those numbers, that the government will present the measures this autumn that will finally allow for reducing this debt GDP ratio below 60%. So in other words, that we will be able to avoid that scenario. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the government will produce and propose. But at the moment, we are, I would say, deeply below 60%. It will be around 54% of GDP this year. However, the situation is, I would say, quite challenging in a sense that the deficit will remain quite large. We will have additional expenditures related to investment into military sector, into military equipment, and that will make generally the situation for the government quite difficult in this area.
Right. I would like to continue on that because you just mentioned the excessive deficit procedure. My question would be how the government can tame this excessive debt. Are we talking about raising taxes or cutting budget spending? And if so, where will they be taxing from and what can they cut?
Theoretically, you either raise taxes or you reduce expenditures, but both measures are usually unpopular, highly unpopular, and especially in the current situation when the government is under the strong pressure of the previous government of the opposition, which was ruling the country for the previous 8 years. So the government will definitely face a challenge here. Additionally, the government made significant, far-reaching with respect to the impact on the public finances promises in the electoral campaign, and it will try to deliver at least a part of this. That is why I don't see any significant room for raising taxes over the next 3 years. I'm focusing on the term of the parliament, and it will be hard to deliver any significant cuts in the expenditure. So how can this fiscal retrenchment, how can this fiscal consolidation be achieved? I think the only way to achieve it is simply to set the growth of expenditures at the level that will be in real terms lower than the growth of GDP, basically. So it's possible that, for instance, the wages of public servants in the longer run will increase at the level of 1% in real terms. However, the room for such measures is limited, as I said, because lots of expenditures are fixed. You can try to manipulate some of them in order to achieve this relatively little growth in real terms in order to reduce the burden for the public finances. I think that's the only way for the government to go over the next years, and I think it will be executed.
All right. So according to you, there might be very little wiggle room that the government can maneuver to make that happen. However, we do have some economists, for example, Piotr Bujak, who was on our show just a couple of days ago, saying that it's actually possible for the government to cut the debt by about 0.5 percentage point without any substantial cut. Do you think that's a realistic take?
So we are talking about the deficit, not debt. The debt will still increase. But when we talk about the deficit, so the general government balance, which will be negative for the years to come, it's possible to achieve this structural effort, as it is called. So the reduction of the general government deficit by roughly 0.5 percentage point of GDP, it's possible. But as I said, some expenditures have to be either frozen at their nominal levels, or their increase has to be limited. Their increase in real terms has to be limited, and it cannot exceed the GDP growth. GDP growth is likely to expand quite swiftly over the next years. We are, I would say, quite optimistic regarding the medium-term prospect of the Polish economy. The Polish economy is likely to grow at the rate of roughly 3% in the medium term. That means that you still have some maneuver because you can, as I said, set the growth of some expenditures in real terms at the level of 1% or 2% and get some savings from this. So this will be a kind of a play between the government and the social partners. Let's hope that there will be an understanding for those needs. Why do we care? I think we care because it's important to contain this expected increase of debt GDP ratio. Poland will be able to stand the debt GDP ratio of roughly 60%, provided that it's stable. Poland is gradually catching up with developed economies, and the acceptance from the financial markets, from investors, for that level of debt will gradually increase. Nevertheless, in times of shocks, when you have a large shock affecting the economy, you usually have massive increase in the deficit and then the debt GDP ratio. So it would be good to have this level of debt GDP ratio contained to provide a buffer for such shocks. The last shock that we faced was the pandemic shock, and then, of course, it was helpful to have the public finances in such a shape that allowed for some massive increase in expenditures and in order to stabilize the economy. So I think this is what's at stake.
All right, so the Polish finance minister actually says that the deficit growth is largely due to defense spending. Well, some economists also think that it's not the case, and there are some structural problems with the budget. What's your take?
I think that when we talk about defense spending, we have to focus more on the future. So definitely this defense spending will increase. There is a certain plan produced by the government, which is consistent with the expenditure that will have to be made in order to improve the condition of the Polish army. and improve the quality of equipment that the Polish army has. So finally, that will lead to quite significant increase in defense spending in relation to GDP. That will cross 3% next year. That will cross 4% in the following year. So definitely this will lead to an increase in deficit and put some pressure on the debt GDP ratio. Nevertheless, recently, over the last years, there have been many initiatives on the fiscal side, primarily on the expenditure side, that has led to increase of expenditures. And generally, that has led to a situation where the structural balance also has to be reduced. So I would say that definitely we enter that period when we have to increase defense spending with the starting point that could be better, of course, from the perspective of the fiscal sustainability. So I would definitely like to see a lower structural balance that would provide some room for the maneuver. So I would say that definitely what we need to do, we have to, on the one side, control defense spending, analyze all the measures that we have to take and think whether all of them are indispensable. And at the same time, try to think about the structural issues in public finances, to try to look for potential savings. However, I believe that the limit, the room for the maneuver here is limited.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. That was our guest, Jakub Borowski, Chief Economist at Credit Agricole Bank Poland, here with us on The Bottom Line. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Business Arena, hosted by Marie Cato and Benjamin Lee. Make sure you join us again on Friday at 5:10 here on TVP World. Take care.